Brasil, o maior mercado da América Latina. Um parceiro do desenvolvimento global. A 8ª potência econômica do mundo. E o principal destino de investimento estrangeiro da América Latina. Um país aberto, integrado e seguro para o investidor. Que se renova para colaborar com a economia global e o desenvolvimento sustentável. O que está na base dessa transformação? E o que esperar do novo governo para o comércio exterior? Painel. O Brasil na economia global. Agenda de inserção internacional.
Portanto, começaremos pelo painel, cujo título é O Brasil na Economia Global, Agenda de Inserção Internacional, que tem o objetivo de discutir os caminhos possíveis para a abertura da economia brasileira perante o mundo. Participarão do painel, vamos agora receber os nossos painelistas, Marcos Troyjo, Secretário Especial de Comércio Exterior e Assuntos Internacionais. Norberto Moretti, Secretário de Política Externa, Comercial e Econômica do Ministério das Relações Exteriores. Rick Scott, Senador nos Estados Unidos. Lisa Squetter, diretora da Dow Chemical. Luiz Pretti, CEO da Cargill. Dilip Sundaram, CEO da Mahindra. O painel terá duração de 90 minutos e as perguntas poderão ser enviadas pelo aplicativo do evento. Para aqueles que não sabem, o aplicativo é o BIF 2019 e pode ser baixado na plataforma da Play Store no seu dispositivo móvel. Bem, aí vocês deverão ir na aba Agenda, selecionem, por favor, o painel número 2 e cliquem em Perguntas. A moderação será de Fabrizio Opertti. Fabrizio é gerente de Comércio e Integração do Banco Interamericano de Desenvolvimento, o BID. Bem, uma boa tarde a todos. E, Fabrizio, a palavra está com você.
Prezadas autoridades, senhoras e senhores, boa tarde. Sejam bem-vindos à terceira edição do Fórum de Investimento do Brasil. Sou uruguaio, de coração baiano, mas queria começar a minha fala com umas palavras em portunhol. Do BID falamos que o portunhol é o idioma oficial do Mercosul. É com muita, sinceramente, com muita alegria que realizamos pela terceira vez este importante evento junto com o governo brasileiro. Antes de entrarnos no tema central deste painel, gostaria de parabenizar o governo brasileiro, em especial as equipes dos Ministério de Economia, do Ministério de Relações Exteriores e de Apex Brasil, que trabalharam duramente junto com a nossa equipe do BID na organização deste evento. Mas, para não dar um nó na cabeça dos tradutores, passarei agora para o inglês, dado que temos um painel bilíngue e multinacional. It is my honor this afternoon to moderate this conversation with such distinguished panelists and to talk about Brazil's insertion in the global economy. And I would like to briefly give some context to this conversation. Regarding trade, we have two bad news and two good news. Let me start with the bad news. The regions, Latin America and the Caribbean's participation in global trade has remained stagnant for half a century. It's about our share in global trade is about 5%. The other bad news is that our intra-regional trade is about 16%. It's quite low compared to Europe, where it's 60, compared to the NAFTA region or USMCA, where it's 50. But now the good news. Since the 1990s, the region has embarked on what is called the Great Liberalization, meaning that trade between us is tariff-free. 90% of trade is tariff-free. So there has been strong trade liberalization. And we also know, and we've done research at the IDB recently in a flagship report that is coming this year, that trade and openness contribute positively to economic growth. In fact, our empirical studies show that trade liberalization is estimated to have accelerated GDP per capita growth in Latin America and the Caribbean in the last 2 decades, on average by 0.6 to 0.7%. So that is all positive. And briefly, Brazil has resumed growth. Brazil is growing again in the past 2 years. Inflation is low, interest rates are low, job creation is on the rise, and there's a very important and necessary pension system reform underway. Brazil exports in 2018 grew by more than 10%, and Brazil receives half of the foreign direct investment of this region. It has also concluded historical trade agreements that were in the making for more than 20 years. Mercosur, European Union, Mercosur, EFTA. So without further ado, I would like to initiate our discussion and give the word to Marcos Troyjo, to the Special Secretary for Foreign Trade and International Affairs of the Ministry of Economy, to give his introductory remarks.
Very good. Thank you very much, Fabrizio. I'd like to extend the warmest welcome salutations for everyone attending this Brazil Investment Forum. And also, it is my pleasure to be joined here by the colleagues of our panel. The title of our session here, Fabrizio, is Brazil in the Global Economy, right? And we have to position ourselves. And the way we position ourselves today in a tech-intensive world is we pull out our smartphones and turn on the GPS, right, the global positioning system. So the first thing that I like to do is perhaps zoom out a little bit with our GPS and look at the global economy, where we stand in the global economy today. So I think it would be fair to say that for quite a long stretch of history, from 1989 all the way to the Great Recession and the fall of Lehman Brothers in 2008, the global economy experienced what I like to call deep globalization, a sort of triumph of the West, the notion that liberal economies and global trade would face less and less barriers, that perhaps regional economic integration would also mean political integration, legal integration, and obviously the European Union with its common court in Strasbourg, its common parliament in Brussels was leading the way. I was posted, for example, to the United Nations in the 1990s, and I remember a German friend of mine who said, well, in the future, in all likelihood, we're going to be less German and we're going to be more European. So there's very much this notion that we were really embarking on a deep process of globalization, or hyper-globalization, as we like to call it. We are clearly no longer that. So since 2008, and all the way to the present day, perhaps we're living under a different operational system in the global economy that I like to call deglobalization. Deglobalization here does not mean the full reversal of deep globalization. It basically means that we're taking downturns, that the road has more curves, and therefore you are reducing speed. Deglobalization means deceleration of deep globalization. And of course, there are many phenomena out there. Perhaps the decision by the British to leave the European Union is one of the most significant ones. So we're in the midst of this local contentism trend also that you can witness in industrial policies adopted across the board, which obviously helps to break out some of the paradigms we had before, such as global supply chains. I think, Fabrizio, deglobalization, unlike many observers agree, is not going to be there with us for very long. So it creates a lot of underperformance. So there's something new that's emerging. And once again, I don't want to keep playing this gimmicks or these buzzwords, but probably the world is entering a phase of re-globalization, which does not mean picking up from where we left off deep globalization, but it means different things. It means a global scope according to 4 very important drivers. 1, the United States is and will continue to be a very important architect of the international system. 2, there's an obviously rivalry between the United States and China that is being felt in the global economy. I like, Senator, to call it a rivalry and not necessarily a trade war, because according to your interpretation of what a trade war is, the objective is to annihilate your opponent, and this is clearly not the case here. The most important trading partner, the top trading partner of the U.S. is China. The top trading partner of China is the U.S. Top U.S. destination for FDI investment coming from the U.S. is China. Top destination for Chinese investment is the United States. So there's a lot of interdependence there that I think is to be underlined. And of course, the operational system in which these 2 economic superpowers interacted is changing and is going to change. But it will also project as global influence. That's why it's one of the drivers in reglobalization. Number 3, of course, we are talking about a world in which there's also a competition for standards. What is the kind of labor legislation that you adapt? What is the kind of environmental legislations? How do you approach intellectual property rights? What kind of a 5G motto are you going to embrace? So there's a competition out there that obviously is going to define the contours of the global economy. And the 4th driver, naturally, Fabrizio, is what at Davos you call the 4th Industrial Revolution, or in Germany you call Industry 4.0. I myself like better to name it Economy 4.0 because it sort of breaks away with the partitions between agriculture and manufacturing and services and high tech. So it's a new world. So this is the GPS being positioned in a zoom out fashion so we can get a panoramic view. But if we zoom it down and not only observing the notion of distance but also the notion of time, there's this formulation by the Indian economist Rishi Sharma that I like very much. And he says that in every cycle of 10 years, there is a winner. So for example, the 50s was all about Europe because you had the Marshall Plan, you had the reconstruction of Europe, so the winners of the 1950s were the European countries. The 60s were about the big US corporations in which the technostructure, executives being more important than shareholders, were there on the top. The 70s were about natural resources. The 80s were about Japan. The 90s were about tech companies. The first decade of this new century, the 2010s, were perhaps about the BRICS, right? Because of their bigger share of the global economy. So what is the winner of this decade that will come to a close in a year and a half? My take is that the winner is the United States, right? I mean, not only does the US keep having 25% as a share of global GDP, but the American stock market represents 55% of everything that's traded at stock market level. 88% of global transactions are settled in the US dollars. About 2/3 of foreign exchange reserves in central banks across the globe are nominated in US dollar terms. So it's clearly one major winner of the past 10 decades. But now let's zoom into Brazil. We come into Brazil. What do you see in Brazil? And it's not a sales pitch. I'm actually repeating a friend of mine who works for one of the most important global consultancies out there, when he says, you look at Brazil and what you see is the most ambitious and comprehensive reform agenda in implementation in the world today. This is what's happening in Brazil. And this transformational agenda, as you've heard from the speech by Minister Paulo Guedes this morning, is made up of five points. Social security reform, which obviously has to do with stopping the past influencing so poorly in the present and the future. Tax reform, and most importantly, the Federative Pact, which is going to reorganize Brazil also from a budget outlook. 3, bringing down the influence of government in the economy. We must kick the state out of an economy that's been driven by it throughout the past 40 years. Number 4, privatizations, concessions. You've heard the numbers. We're going to close this year at about 20 billion government assets being privatized. And of course, the 5th point, which is under part of my purview in cooperation with Ambassador Norberto and our friends at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is opening up Brazil's economy. You have mentioned very correctly that Brazil, Mercosur and European Union have concluded last June 28th, that which is the biggest trade treaty in the history of the economy, either by considering the number of players involved or the geographical scope that it entails. And we're going to keep doing that. We're negotiating with Canada, with Mexico, we're probably going to have, depending on the electoral results in Argentina, also to adjust Mercosur to this new phase. But this is the determination. The message that I wanted to leave at this point is, you think about 4 years ago, Fabrizio, everyone said there is a perfect storm coming Brazil's way, either because the global economy does not favor Brazil, either because Brazil is facing the dire effects of a systemic corruption process that has really stagnated Brazil's economy. What we have right now is Brazil putting together the elements for a perfect sunny day. And that's what we're working for. We want to make the 2020s belong to Brazil. Along with our friends and partners, we want the 2020s to have Brazil as a winner. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Troyjo. Ambassador Moretti.
Boa tarde a todos. Cumprimento os meus colegas de painel. Eu vou falar em português e se eu ouvir, if I see too many headphones, then I'll change to English. But I think that most of us do speak Portuguese. Agradecer o convite da Apex para estar nesse painel. Os senhores e as senhoras terão ouvido várias vezes ao longo do dia de hoje que este é um governo que trabalha em sintonia, o que é verdade. E nós vamos ter aqui mais uma demonstração disso, porque a intervenção do secretário Marcos Troyjo deu, para mim, o perfeito pano de fundo dos elementos que eu vou compartilhar com vocês essa tarde. Um outro elemento que também nós ouvimos ao longo da manhã, eu, infelizmente, não pude estar, e provavelmente serei punido por isso severamente, mas não pude estar nas conferências do meu próprio ministro, do chanceler, e não pude estar na conferência do ministro Paulo Guedes, mas o que nós ouvimos hoje de manhã cedo é suficiente para eu acreditar que todos os que ouvimos saíram, muito especialmente da conferência, das palavras introdutórias do ministro Paulo Guedes, a impressão de que se está fazendo muito e em muitas direções, todas certas, felizmente, nenhuma equivocada, e eu pego isso um pouco como gancho da minha breve intervenção. Há uma expressão em francês, que não é, digamos, o idioma mais usado nesse ambiente, mas que diz tous azimuts, ou seja, todos os azimuts, todas as direções, e quando você trabalha no governo e observando, ou um observador isento, objetivo, intelectualmente honesto do governo, do trabalho do governo, me parece que deve chegar a essa conclusão. Nós estamos fazendo muito em todas as direções, ou em muitas das direções, todas elas que se provarão corretas, pelo menos trabalhamos para isso cotidianamente. E esse, digamos, esse gancho me é útil porque, quando se olha em política comercial, e o secretário Troyjo mencionou isso ao final da intervenção, todos conhecemos, falamos, lemos sobre os dois grandes acordos, muito especialmente o acordo Mercosul-União Europeia, cuja conclusão ocorreu há 45 dias, mais ou menos, depois o acordo com a EFTA. Sabemos, não é, que estão avançando as negociações com o Canadá, Singapura, Coreia do Sul, cada um com as suas dificuldades e cada um com os seus tempos. Mas essa é a primeira mensagem que eu queria deixar. não é... aqui sim o céu é o limite, ou seja, nós estamos, sem prejuízo das nossas limitações, inclusive de capital humano no governo para fazer todas as negociações ao mesmo tempo, a disposição é efetivamente universal. E eu confesso que, às vezes, em alguns casos, me deparo com uma situação inimaginável, alguns anos atrás, em que funcionários do governo brasileiro viajam, se encontram com homólogos estrangeiros, pressionam por algum tipo de negociação comercial, quando, tipicamente, nós estávamos, os papéis eram inversos, ou seja, nós éramos pressionados, não é? Os que vivemos, por exemplo, processos como ALCA, e sobretudo ao seu final, e nos encontramos numa situação, às vezes, repito, algo curiosa, em ver o Brasil, um país que ainda continua fechado, com uma economia, né, em termos relativos, fechada, demandando liberalização comercial, demandando negociações. Então, no que diz respeito a negociações comerciais, essa é é muito mais do que uma tendência, é uma realidade que se aprofundará e se imporá e que ganhará velocidade à medida que ela prossiga, né? E uma negociação numa negociação nós aprendemos é um pouco como falar idiomas, não é? Você aprende um e o segundo é mais fácil, o terceiro é mais fácil, o quarto é mais fácil. Vários desafios que nós tínhamos em termos de, não só de política comercial, mas de políticas públicas em outras matérias, foram, de algum modo, resolvidos na negociação com o Mercosul e a União Europeia e abrem espaço para outras negociações complexas que virão. Então, a primeira mensagem que eu gostaria de deixar, no pouco tempo que nós temos, infelizmente, é isso. É em todas as direções e com grande intensidade. Mas, como o secretário mencionava, nós estamos num painel que fala da inserção econômica do Brasil. A inserção, evidentemente, se dá por diversos meios, modalidades. Política comercial é um deles, né? Mas se nós olharmos em ciência e tecnologia, em energia, agricultura, evidentemente, em todo o espectro, digamos, de interesses da sociedade e de campos de ação do governo, há essa dinâmica de integração. O ministro Paulo Guedes mencionava, por exemplo, a revolução no campo do gás, né? E várias dessas revoluções não serão feitas sem o aprofundamento da nossa inserção internacional. Não só por necessidade, porque, por exemplo, infraestrutura, o Estado não tem mais hoje, por exemplo, a capacidade de financiar a infraestrutura e são necessários capitais domésticos, nacionais, mas também capitais internacionais. Portanto, é por necessidade, mas é também by design, não é? Ou seja, pela convicção de que o Brasil e o mundo serão melhores se nós estivermos mais integrados. Portanto, não é necessidade, é também virtude. Eu não quero estourar muito meu tempo, mas há dois elementos específicos que eu queria mencionar, três, na verdade, muito rapidamente, nesse esforço de integração que, repito, vai muito além da política comercial. O primeiro é OCDE. O ministro Paulo Guedes mencionou isso um pouco nas palavras introdutórias. É de conhecimento, digamos, de todos, que o Brasil postula, e já não de hoje, postula a sua acessão à OCDE, e é um exemplo, claro, de que esse esforço vai muito além de política comercial. Como os senhores sabem, as senhoras sabem, a OCDE se ocupa de uma ampla gama de temas, e via convergência regulatória crescente, que nós também integraremos, inseriremos o Brasil, a economia brasileira na economia mundial. E esse é também um elemento importante que muitas das vezes passa despercebido, me parece, na imprensa, com ganhos importantes de governança pública, né? Sobretudo no desenho e implementação de políticas públicas. Porque, evidentemente, não adianta ter, ou não é suficiente você ter uma economia aberta do ponto de vista de política comercial, com tarifas baixas, etc., se o conjunto das outras políticas públicas não sustenta o aproveitamento, não potencializa o aproveitamento pela economia brasileira, pelos agentes econômicos brasileiros, pelos consumidores dessas oportunidades, não é? Nós teríamos, inclusive, desequilíbrios momentâneos que não seriam depois mitigados e tornados em benefícios sem esse conjunto de políticas públicas. Portanto, isso é fundamentalíssimo. O processo não é simples, como nós sabemos, não é um processo meramente técnico, é um processo político, podemos falar dele mais adiante, mas nenhuma dúvida de que, independentemente de qualquer coisa, mantém-se a mais firme decisão do governo brasileiro de continuar esse processo de aproximação com a OCDE em benefício do Brasil. Rápido outro comentário, OMC. A OMC, depois de muitos anos de dúvida quanto à sua própria capacidade de realizar, vem com alguma dificuldade, mas dando sinais de que pode ser, sim, um instrumento importante de avanço em matéria de liberalização comercial ou de integração de economias. Também podemos falar disso mais tarde, mas apenas peço que as senhoras e os senhores tenham em mente que o cenário de um ano atrás, antes da Conferência de Buenos Aires, hoje é diferente. Há alguns processos de negociação de acordos plurilaterais de grande importância, o principal deles em comércio eletrônico, que frutificarão, espero, não daqui a muito tempo. Repito, nas perguntas nós teremos a oportunidade de conversar um pouco mais. Agradeço a oportunidade. Obrigado.
Obrigado, Mahal. Senator Scott, your turn.
First off, it's great to be here. This is my second trip to Brazil. I just finished in December my 8 years as the governor of Florida, which is the third biggest state in the United States. And I came here in 2011, and I brought 200 business people with me, and we came to Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, and basically to try to create more trade. I had become the governor of Florida that year, and the 4 years before I became governor, we had lost in Florida 800,000 jobs. Home prices dropped in half. Our economy was doing horribly. And so I believed one of the opportunities was trade around, especially Latin America, which is where we had the big advantage. So in that trip, we talked to a lot of business people. They didn't seem very optimistic. We didn't meet with many people from government. They weren't interested in, at least in meeting with us to talk about trade. In contrast, I've been here 3 days. I met with President Bolsonaro, and you can't find somebody that I've met people all over the world. He is more result-oriented than almost anybody I've met, and he knows the job of being the president is fleeting, it's not forever, and he's very, very, very focused on what can you do today to increase trade, which means more jobs for Brazilians. I met with a lot of people that work with the president, and they're very focused on how you improve this economy. Next, I met with a lot of business people in the last 3 days, way more optimistic than in 2011. So you're doing basically the exact same thing I had to do when I became governor of Florida, and you can do it. I mean, we went from losing 800,000 jobs to, in my years as governor, we added 1.7 million jobs. We increased our economy by around 30% in 8 years. And so it's all doable based on what you've elected. You've elected a team of people that are going to completely change the direction of Brazil. Now, it's important to Florida. You were our biggest trading partner in 2011. Because of the free trade agreement with Colombia, you became our second biggest trading partner today. But there's no reason with 220 million people, with the energy of Brazilians, there's no reason that you will not become Florida's biggest trading partner. So, and I personally believe that if you get more trade between the United States and Brazil, everybody wins. And the opportunity for Brazilians is staggering. Think about the numbers for a second. Our economy for Florida is basically a little bit less than 1/2 of yours, and we have 1/10 the number of people. You have an unbelievable opportunity here, and my goal is to make sure America participates in that. Now, you have to do, and it's hard, you have to deal with all the issues you're dealing with. I had to do pension reform. I had to watch how we spent the money. I had to downsize government. I had to reduce regulation. I had to streamline the permitting process. It's not easy. So what you've elected, they're going to work their tail off, but it's going to take a lot of support, and it's going to take a lot of support of the business community to get that done. Now, I wish that China was only our rival, and they might not be as a big an issue in Brazil as they are in the United States, but they have become a clear adversary to the United States. And so we're having a decoupling of our economies right now between China and America. And it's caused, in my opinion, 100% because of the Chinese government. Whether it's the fact that they joined the WTO, they won't open up their markets to American products. They're stealing $100 to $200 billion a year of our technology. Stealing it. It's basically, if you want to do business in China, you're going to give them your technology. Right? So other places steal your property, or your real property, they're stealing your intellectual property. They follow all their citizens on social media, but they can't find where all the fentanyl is being produced in China that they're selling into America. I just was in Hong Kong. Right? There's basic rights that were given to the Hong Kong citizens in 1997 in the turnover. Those are being taken away right now. That's wrong. That's not the way it was supposed to be. They shouldn't be doing helping Maduro in Venezuela. Why are they doing that? They promised President Obama they wouldn't militarize the South China Sea. They did. They committed to buy products from us in January. They didn't do it. So I think it's going to be very difficult to get a trade agreement with them done. I wish we could. I think it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible. And the latest is Huawei. If you look at what they've done around the world, Huawei is being used by the Chinese government to take away privacy from governments and citizens. And so it's a big issue in our country. I think it's a big worldwide issue that we're all going to deal with. But while China has become our adversary, I'm very optimistic of what's going to happen between America and Brazil. I think we're going to see unbelievable increase in trade, and it's great to be here.
Thank you, Senator. Lisa, your turn.
Thank you. Bom dia. Right, that's about all that I can offer. But we're really excited to be here. And thank you. Okay, you missed me say bon dia. And we're really excited to be here because I think for all the reasons that you're hearing, this is a level of excitement, particularly about the U.S.-Brazil relationship and the opportunity for real reform and partnership and drive that we haven't seen in a very long time. As the Senator said, there is a commitment by both administrations to really look at the necessary, ambitious domestic reforms that are going to help us not only drive trade liberalization and the role that Brazil can reestablish itself in the global economy, but to make that make sense. We see an unprecedented level of political commitment to making this happen. And that's one of the reasons that we, as Dow, were very excited about joining the U.S.-Brazil CEO Forum. As an American multinational with 62 years of history here in Brazil, we felt that it was such a great opportunity to work in partnership with government to translate that political will and commitment into a real actionable agenda. How we can work together to underpin the priorities and the practicals that can help drive us towards our long-term goals, getting to a U.S.-Brazil free trade agreement, securing Brazil's accession to the OECD. There's so many best practices and opportunities that we can share as we work towards those long-term goals. If you look at the U.S. administration, what the Trump administration has driven so far, clearly there's a huge commitment to driving trade and to making trade liberalization work for our economies. That's why we'll be very excited and hopeful to see USMCA pass this year. It's a great example of where we're demonstrating real progress. But what has the administration gotten done in the meantime? In the meantime, there has been tax reform. There is an incredible dedicated effort to smart regulation. A lot of the same domestic reforms, Governor Scott, that you made in that role. And while it might be hard, we can all come together to help make that happen so that we focus on ensuring as competitive an industry as possible so that we can truly be competitive as we liberalize and get access to more open markets. It's as the minister was saying, when you think of Economia 4.0, we really need to be revisiting and growing that competitiveness so that we're not just focusing on how do we protect the market that exists now, how do we grow and innovate the markets, the companies, the industries that we want to see developing as we grow into the future. That's one of the reasons why in the U.S.-Brazil CEO Forum, we're trying to focus very specifically on the practical. When you look at some of the things that could really matter, where U.S. and Brazil could come together and drive reform and initiatives that will make a difference for all of our companies, trade facilitation. Perfect example. We all know if you've got a cargo that's stuck at the port, you lose dollars or reals every day that that's sitting there. And it doesn't just affect you as the importer. your customer, the person who's turning maybe our chemical products into cars and iPhones and automotive parts. You want to be able to have access. The more you're delayed, the more everybody's delayed, and that just further handicaps the economy. We can fix these issues. Regulatory reform. It's one of those areas where, as we all know, anyone in a company knows, that's real day-to-day issues. It's one thing if you can get your product over the border and into the market, but if you don't have the regulatory approval to get it onto the shelf, you've defeated the purpose. We're denying ourselves the kind of innovation that we really want to be inspiring. So working towards sound science, risk-based regulation not only helps in terms of facilitating real innovation and investment on the ground, it also helps serve these long-term goals. Common regulation makes it a lot easier. As the ambassador is saying, when you negotiate a free trade agreement, the more common elements you have, the less work you need to do. Regulatory reform is also a critical element of the OECD application. So taking on these initiatives now, making that progress now, makes all of these long-term goals really possible. That's why we're really excited. This is a unique window of opportunity for us to come together and work under the government commitment to real reform, long-term growth, and accessing that global economy. We can help make that happen with much stronger, competitive, and innovative industries.
Thank you,
Obrigada.
Lisa. Thank you. Luiz Pretti.
Boa tarde a todos. Em primeiro lugar, queria agradecer muito à Apex, ao Ministério de Economia, Ministério de Relações Exteriores, a você, Fabrizio, por estar conduzindo esse painel, aos meus colegas do painel. Eu fui apresentado como presidente da Cargill, mas eu, além de representar a Cargill hoje aqui, que eu vou falar um pouquinho dela daqui a pouco, falar da economia real, o que está acontecendo na nossa visão, eu também tenho o privilégio de ser o presidente do Conselho da Câmara Americana. E a Câmara Americana, esse ano, o secretário Marcos Troyjo conhece bastante bem, nós comemoramos 100 anos no Brasil. É um compromisso com o Brasil muito grande. E essa Câmara, ela representa 1/3 do PIB brasileiro. Somos mais de 5 mil associados. Então, parte desses problemas e dessas soluções, todas essas ideias que nós estamos comentando aqui hoje, são muito importantes para nós da Câmara. E quando a gente pensa na Câmara Americana como uma Câmara Americana, 80% dos nossos associados são brasileiros. Eu concordo muito que os ambos secretários falaram e que ontem tive a oportunidade de estar com o ministro Paulo Guedes, com a ministra de Agricultura, Tereza Cristina, ministro Ernesto Araújo, hoje de manhã eu não pude vir aqui, que as estrelas estão alinhadas no sentido correto para o desenvolvimento brasileiro. Mas eu, representando hoje uma das maiores empresas em termos de exportação no Brasil, a Cargill é uma empresa de faturamento aqui no Brasil de 14 bilhões de dólares, e apesar do tema não ser esse, nós estamos falando de investimentos no Brasil. Nossa empresa, nos últimos 8 anos, fez investimentos, 8 anos difíceis, como o secretário Troyjo comentou bastante bem, fizemos investimentos de 1,6 bilhão de dólares no Brasil. E queremos investir mais, não só nós da Cargill, mas as empresas que eu represento como Câmara Americana. E ainda que eu concorde que algumas reformas estão a caminho, eu também, como bom brasileiro, sou muito otimista que elas vão ser aprovadas, reforma da Previdência, reforma tributária, que nós estamos, como Câmara Americana, apoiando a PEC 45, a reforma de deixar o governo mais leve, essa reforma administrativa, que também é muito importante para nós, brasileiros, entre outras. Eu gostei muito da fala do secretário, quando ele menciona a falta de infraestrutura. É difícil a gente só acreditar que o Brasil ele esteja no momento correto se nós, como empresários, não tivermos o apoio do governo para investimentos na área de infraestrutura. Então, eu acredito que o setor, aí que eu represento também, sendo a maior empresa de agronegócio no Brasil, e há 54 anos no Brasil, gerando 11 mil empregos, tendo 26 fábricas, 6 portos, nós precisamos de um apoio no governo no sentido de facilitar a infraestrutura para continuar investindo ainda mais no Brasil. O setor de agronegócios representa, hoje, 40% das exportações brasileiras e, em termos de PIB, o setor de agronegócios representa 25% do PIB brasileiro. E a nossa intenção, como Cargill e como setor, é continuar investindo cada vez mais no país. Não dá para a gente pensar em alimentar 9,5 bilhões de pessoas no mundo em 2050 sem pensar no Brasil. Essa é a minha mensagem para a gente começar a refletir. Obrigado.
Obrigado, Luiz. Dilip, for the last introductory remarks of the panel.
Yes, thank you, Fabrizio. First and foremost, I want to thank Apex and the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for hosting such a wonderful event and giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you. Now, I have been attending this for some time, and I can tell you that this event is bigger and bigger every year, and it's a lot more impressive. So congratulations to Apex. So again, thank you for having me here. I represent an Indian company. It's called Mahindra. And before we go forward with what Mahindra is and why Brazil is important to Mahindra and to India, as well as why Mahindra is important to Brazil and why Indian companies are important to Brazil, I would also like to congratulate the government of Brazil for taking very aggressive steps in terms of reforms. And thank you very much. I mean, that is something that is needed, that has always been needed, and it is very timely. And particularly in the backdrop of the BRICS summit that's going to happen next month here in Brasilia. So Mahindra is an Indian company. It's $21 billion with 200,000 employees at a global level. We are the largest farm tractor company in the world, and we are also a leader in SUVs and rugged vehicles that works very well in countries where there is bad infrastructure, like India, for example, and Brazil. And then we are also leaders in technology services and engineering services business. Now, coming to the Americas, which is kind of what I'm responsible for, in the U.S., we are $2.7 billion in revenues, and we have been there for the last 25 years. We have about 6,500 employees. Now, what we did in the U.S. in the last 25 years, we want to do that in Brazil in the next 5 years. So we have very aggressive plans here in Brazil. So it would be surprising to know that we have 1,500 employees here in Sao Paulo, as well as in a place called Dois Hermanos near Porto Alegre. Here in Sao Paulo, we have our engineering services and technology business that really serves most of the Brazilian companies. Most of the employees, all the employees actually are Brazilians. And at the same time in Porto Alegre, again, we make and assemble farm tractors. We are just entering that market. We've been doing that only in the last 5 or 6 years. But we are really looking forward to this being a very important market for Mahindras. Now, again, as I said, we are very optimistic about the growth of about our opportunities here in Brazil, and a lot of it has to do with all the reforms that are taking place. Now, there are many Indian companies here, particularly in the pharmaceutical area, and what is interesting is the fact that the Brazilian government in the 90s brought the HIV under control here in Brazil, not with the help of American companies, not with the help of European companies, but with the help of one single Indian company. So I think from that perspective, you can see that Indian companies matter to Brazil. I think Indian companies can contribute immensely to Brazil's growth. And I am proud to be a part of that Indian company, which is here. We work in the agricultural space, and we make products which are really for the smaller farms, so which also means the economically disadvantaged farmers. And that is really what our product lines are all about, and that's what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilip. Well, a lot of material has been covered with really interesting perspectives, but we need to cover much more. So we'll go to the first round of questions. I politely urge the speakers to keep yourselves within the time limitations, and with Brazilian optimism, I know that you will do it. So, Secretary Troyjo, to start. You have mentioned that the big trade agreement that Brazil needs to conclude is with itself, suggesting that reaping the benefits from trade negotiations requires undertaking important domestic reforms. So could you help us understand a little bit more how both are connected, that intermestic, if you want, agenda, and how much progress has this administration achieved, and what are the plans, the specific plans in this area?
Very good. Thank you, Senator and Ambassador. It's very important to have a historical perspective on this because, I mean, Brazil used to be the country, along with Japan, all the way to the second half of the 1970s, to have grown the most in the 20th century, right? Brazil was a big winner of the first 75 years of the last century. But then, instead of using its model of import substitution and the protection of infant industries to pivot, to go towards the global economy, open up, participate in the global supply chain network, Brazil remained a closed society. A closed society in the sense that trade represents a relatively small percentage of its GDP. If you look at the world's top 20 economies, Brazil is the one to have the least proportion of the sum of exports and imports as a percentage of GDP. It's only about 25%. It's been like that for a long time. So we did not open up in the sense of signing treaties, of making unilateral moves to be more integrated to global trade. And simultaneously, we did not enact domestic reforms that are so important for competitiveness. The result of all that, and we have to be very candid here, is that Brazil's insertion or international insertion of this past 30 years, Fabrizio, has really been a masterclass in inefficiency and underperformance, right? What can we learn from this process? The countries that have also used import substitution models, like South Korea, at one moment they pivoted and they integrated themselves with the rest of the global economy through commercial treaties, through the unilateral opening of some sectors. They became very successful, especially because domestic reforms were undertaken hand in hand with this commercial diplomacy that the ambassador so ably described. You look at Mexico, for example. Mexico established a great number of international trade treaties since it joined NAFTA in the 1990s, but it did not enact the domestic reforms to provide for its competitiveness. So if it's true on the one hand that Mexico is much better off than you would be if it had not performed all of these international treaties, it is also true that one of the reasons why Mexico does not have a Mediterranean Europe level of income per capita is because the domestic reforms were not there. How can we interpret it, this sentence of mine, which I'm very proud of, that the most important trade treaty that Brazil has to achieve is the one with itself, is that we should use international trade and investment agreements as an accelerator, as a catalyzer of domestic reforms. And this is the example we get from the countries that have really emerged, that have really been super successful in expanding their GDP per capita in this past 25 years. So even if we have the most active and aggressive and successful commercial trade policy, if we do not do our internal homework to harmonize our domestic capacities to compete internationally, then once again the Brazilian economy is going to underperform. And we're doing every bit we can so that does not happen.
Thank you, Secretary. Ambassador Moretti, discussions about the future of the multilateral trading system, which you mentioned in the introduction, and the WTO in particular, have been at the heart of trade tensions over the past several years. What is Brazil's view in regards to the reform of the WTO and the multilateral trading system, and what role can Brazil and other Latin American and Caribbean countries play in this important process?
Muito obrigado. Só essa pergunta já daria todo um seminário, na verdade, mas...
Tem 4 minutos.
Exatamente. Primeiro, repetir o que nós temos dito incessantemente, que a OMC continua fundamental. Em alguns lugares, em alguns momentos, virou moda ou chique criticar a OMC. A OMC, como tudo no mundo, é mais do que mejorable.
Improvable.
Improvable. E depois de 25, 26, 25 anos, está claro que a OMC foi negociada e criada num mundo que já vai deixando de existir de algum modo, né? Nós mencionamos China, por exemplo. Esse é um dos grandes fatores de diferença entre o mundo que havia ao final dos anos 90, dos anos 80 e dos anos 90 e o que existe hoje, né? Portanto, não há dúvida de que precisa ser reformada e profundamente, mas a OMC é insubstituível em vários aspectos. Tomemos um óbvio, né, e que para o Brasil é de fundamental importância, que é melhor regulação de apoio doméstico em agricultura. Ou seja, não há substituto para a OMC nessa matéria. E hoje a OMC vive um momento muito difícil talvez o elemento mais visível e urgente dessa grande dificuldade, eu não quero usar a palavra crise, dessa grande dificuldade, é que em poucas semanas, a partir do dia 11 de outubro, a OMC não terá o sistema de solução de controvérsias que foi negociado e que operará até o dia 10 de dezembro desse ano, já que o órgão de apelação ficará disfuncional pela falta de designação de membros, né? Um número mínimo de membros, que é de 3 membros. Isso que pode parecer para as empresas que, felizmente, não têm ou não estão interessadas em nenhuma controvérsia internacional, comercial, pode parecer um tema meio remoto, coisa de diplomatas em Genebra, de acadêmicos, etc. Não é assim. Para que os senhores tenham ideia, um cálculo recente, não feito pelo governo, por uma organização privada no Brasil, colocou um price tag envolvido no conjunto de controvérsias, ou melhor, que surge de um conjunto de controvérsias em que o Brasil está envolvido. Hoje o Brasil participa de 7 controvérsias na OMC, 5 como autor, o demandante, 2 como demandado, e o preço, digamos, o montante dos valores envolvidos nesses casos soma 7 bilhões de dólares. Então, não estamos falando de pouco dinheiro. Então, é fundamental que a organização estabeleça e restabeleça a sua capacidade de resolver disputas. A posição do Brasil, portanto, é de dar absoluta centralidade da OMC, com toda a necessidade de reforma que todos nós conhecemos. O que o Brasil tem feito? Qual é a posição do Brasil? É de auxiliar, de ajudar com realismo, com pragmatismo, the whole membership a encontrar os caminhos para garantir a contínua relevância da organização. Nós temos sido muito atuantes em apoio doméstico, em temas agrícolas. Anteontem, circulamos, por exemplo, mais uma proposta em matéria de comércio eletrônico, de facilitação em matéria de comércio eletrônico. Foi uma iniciativa muito oportuna, bem-vindo do Ministério da Economia, com quem nós trabalhamos em torno disso. E o que os países latino-americanos podem fazer, que é a última parte da pergunta? A imensa maioria dos países latino-americanos hoje integra um grupo de países em desenvolvimento que entende que desenvolvimento é um elemento fundamental do comércio internacional, mas que é necessário garantir, que tratamento especial e diferenciado e desenvolvimento at the core of international trade não são as mesmas coisas, são coisas diferentes. E dois, politicamente, criar um centro gravitacional político na OMC que distancia a organização da polarização em que hoje se encontra, por razões várias. E nós estamos fazendo isso. E é uma contribuição que, tomado o grupo regional, poucos outros grupos regionais podem dar. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Ambassador. Senator Scott mentioned something very, very interesting in your introduction that we'd like you to delve a little bit more in depth. As governor of Florida, you carried out many business-friendly reforms. You were mentioning to attract investment, to attract citizens to your state. What lessons can be learned from your process? Can we derive from that process to this moment that Brazil is living and to this reform process that Brazil is undergoing?
First off, let me completely agree with what the Secretary said. You know, if you want reform, it's basically a contract among yourselves. And what that means is right now you've done the job at the Republic level, and you've elected an administration that understands the importance of making it an easier place to do business so you'll get more jobs for your citizens. But the reality is there's going to be an election in a few years. Are you going to elect the same mentality of individuals? Are you going to do it at your state level, and are you going to do it at your local level? If you don't, you'll have some success, but you won't have as much success as if you just keep doing it every election. So here's what I figured out in Florida. We're competing with 49 other states, and of course we're competing globally. So if I wanted my businesses to do better, I had to make their life easier. So what did I do? Number one is I dramatically streamlined the permitting process. If you're going to get an environmental permit, I try to tell you yes or no immediately, within days, not within years. If the answer is no, the answer is no. But if the answer is yes, say yes in a day or two and let them get on their way and going to do something. Number two, review all your regulations. Every regulation, say, maybe that made sense 20 years ago, but do you actually need it today? Does government need to be involved in that? Because every regulation costs money. Those two things probably had the biggest impact on getting the job market going than anything else. But then on top of that, what government can do is exactly what your president's doing. You know, making sure you're having conferences like this, making sure they show up, making sure they're accessible to what the problems are so you can solve them. What I always told everybody is call me. I will, if I think if you have a problem, I will try to solve it for you. And if I solve it for you, I probably solve it for a whole bunch of businesses all across the state. Now, I didn't get to do it all by myself. I had a big administration, but that was the whole mentality of everybody that worked with me. So, but the biggest thing is, are you going to continue this? And are you going to do it at every level of your government? Because this is actually, you have to make the decision, is this the type of government you want? Historically, businesses sometimes use government to create barriers, but ultimately, long-term, it hurts those same businesses. Because what you see around the world, economies that have opened up, everybody has the opportunity to do well. Now you have to compete, you have to get better all the time, but I'm a business guy, I loved competing, and I always planned on winning. But the biggest thing is, you've got to decide, are you going to continue to have a government that cares about getting rid of the permitting time, getting rid of regulation? Taxes are a major part of it, but and if you look at the big things, it's one, permitting, two, regulatory, three, taxes.
Thank you, Senator. Lisa, let's talk about a little bit about public-private dialogue. And we know the role of leadership that Doha has taken on the U.S.-Brazil CEO Forum, and 10-second publicity about also the Americas Business Dialogue that the IDB facilitates with many Brazilian companies, and Doha is part of Cargill also, so any big Brazilian company that wants to join the Americas Business Dialogue is a very potent mechanism out there. But you are U.S. chair of the Trade and Tax Committee in that forum. And given the ambitious goals set by both presidents to increase U.S.-Brazil two-way trade, right now is about 100 billion, the total trade. What do you see as the immediate opportunities, in particular, to streamline trade and investment and to grow U.S. participation in Brazil's domestic economy?
Absolutely, and I think that's the great part about these dialogues, because really business can play a role as government thinks through this ambitious domestic reform program of really embedding that in what is the commercial reality of today. Because as you just said, things have changed a lot. Things change daily these days. The more we can ensure that regulations, that standards, the practices in place make sense, we need to be bringing that information to the government. So activities like the CEO Forum, we see this as a wonderful way to come together and have that conversation, but much more importantly, create the action plan. And that's what we're working on now as part of that, the Trade and Tax Task Force that we co-chair on the U.S. side. We've really been looking at what are the immediate areas where we could see real progress. As Secretary Troyjo mentioned, when we think about not just trade history, but current trade practice, there's a great opportunity from a scoping standpoint to look at what's in EU-Mercosur, to look at USMCA, see the kind of commitments we've been willing to make with other trading partners, and how does that help form the base of what we should be doing with each other. Look at areas like trade facilitation. Maybe not one of the sexiest areas of trade when you come to think about it, but this is real day-to-day core business. And when you can improve customs efficiencies, when we can reduce the wait time, when we can look at how that aligns with investing in infrastructure, the more we can bring product in and make it part of that value chain, the more everybody benefits. And those can be some fairly simple things. The U.S. and Brazil have been negotiating a mutual recognition of the CTPAT, Authorized Economic Operator, in essence, fast-track programs to bring goods through the ports. We need to get that done. We were able to get that done, create that green lane mechanism. We could really leverage that to look less at how much time we need to spend waiting to clear a cargo, more on what we can turn that cargo into from a domestic economic standpoint. Regulatory cooperation. There's so much in that process, and especially as we work together with regulators, the more that process is open, transparent, there's an opportunity for consultation. We can bring together those great minds that really focus on what are regulations that make sense based on how business works these days. That really gets to the heart of innovation and how we grow our expanding in our future economies. When you think about new products, Dow's developing this fantastic product that uses recycled plastic into road asphalt. You get more sustainable roads, and it's also helping eliminate waste plastic. In essence, kind of commercializing something that's considered trash now. The more we can, now that we're developing that product, can we actually bring it out to the market? How hard is it to work through the process to ensure that innovation that solves economic and environmental goals is actually something we can really commercialize? Within the CEO Forum, we've really been looking at, certainly within the Trade and Tax Group, but more broadly, when you think about infrastructure, and that's been a call we've been raising in the U.S. for quite some time too, how do we align the drive for infrastructure investment with maximum return? It's one thing to build a road, but if you look at railroads, for example, investing in railroads that drive moving more product, more people, and creating more jobs, that's a triple win for everybody. And that's a much better return for the investment being made, especially if we align it with where are the economic areas that need that greater infrastructure that could grow, invest, and create more jobs if they had more access to moving their products.
Thank you, Lisa, for your eloquent comments on bringing down those trade barriers which take value out of trade, and that's key. I'm talking about trade, Luiz, and our global trade in particular. how are global food corporations like Cargill using new technologies and innovation in order to build an increasingly integrated world towards reaching the goal of feeding 9 billion people by 2050? How can Brazil, how can the Americas feed the world?
Em primeiro lugar, como você falou, eu acho que é importante mencionar, Cargill hoje é uma empresa que está em 70 países e nós acreditamos no livre comércio, no free trade. E recentemente, Senador, recebemos aqui na AmCham, aqui no Brasil, o Secretário de Comércio, Wilbur Ross, e através da AmCham entregamos para eles e também para o nosso secretário Troyjo uma proposta de 10 medidas para desburocratizar e facilitar o livre comércio. Eu gostei muito quando o senador comentou sobre algumas iniciativas que ele teve no estado da Flórida em relação a licenças, permits, como ele usou, e isso é uma coisa que o Brasil vem sofrendo muito. Já há algum tempo que nós, empresários, investidores, temos sentido uma dificuldade muito grande em conseguir ir para frente com os nossos projetos. Mas o free trade e inovação e trazer, como foi falado aqui pelos meus colegas, deixar o mercado cada dia mais livre, só vai ser possível se nós, como brasileiros, a Cargill atua em 70 países, como eu falei, nós prepararmos as nossas empresas para competirem. Não adianta nada a gente simplesmente abrir e começar a fazer um livre comércio se as empresas brasileiras, inclusive empresas como Cargill, que está aqui no Brasil há muitos anos, e outras empresas estrangeiras, Dow, que estão aqui, não tiverem as mesmas condições de competir. E só nós vamos conseguir competir através de uma ampla reforma, que já foi falada aqui, de amplas reformas, né? Em relação à inovação, não dá realmente para pensar que o Brasil vai continuar sempre fazendo a mesma coisa, e hoje, nossa produção, esse ano, a nossa produção de grãos vai chegar em alguma coisa em torno de 241 milhões de toneladas de grãos. E isso, praticamente, fazendo investimentos via Embrapa, por exemplo, que desenvolveu muito o setor de agricultura, além do empreendedorismo dos nossos fazendeiros, dos nossos farmers, grandes e pequenos farmers, que nós também atuamos com pequenos farmers também, e isso é fundamental. Então, a inovação é parte do processo, é fundamental para o processo do Brasil continuar sendo considerado um celeiro do mundo. Muitas pessoas me perguntam, Pretti, mas é fácil falar, porque o Brasil tem uma coisa muito natural de ser considerado celeiro do mundo na parte de alimentos, o setor de agro vai muito bem, mas as coisas não são excludentes. Eu acredito muito que o Brasil tem condições de ser um grande player, de grande importância no setor de tecnologia, de inovação, o brasileiro como um todo é muito criativo, e eu também estou muito otimista com todas essas mudanças. Agora, volto a insistir, sem infraestrutura, sem investimento, sem compromisso de médio e longo prazo, é muito difícil. A gente tem sofrido isso há alguns anos.
Obrigado, Luiz. Dilip, talking about technology, Mahindra has heavy presence here in Brazil in a wide array of industries ranging from aerospace, farming equipment, information technology. How is Mahindra adapting to this fast-changing technologies of the fourth industrial revolution? And what roles actually your operations in Brazil play in that process? Because there's a lot of innovation coming out of Brazil.
Yes, right. So the fourth industrial revolution really is a confluence of technology and biology. So I mean, that is something we need to understand. So which means that when you're wearing a wristwatch that is monitoring your pulse and that's sending that information to your doctor and kind of is more predicting your health, I mean, that is fourth industrial revolution. Now, from our perspective, I mean, so when we are looking at it from a Mahindra standpoint, I mean, let's look at customer experience. You walk into a car dealership. The traditional way of buying a car was always been to talk to a dealer, talk to a car salesman, and the salesman tells you about different cars. You take it out for a drive, and then you start negotiating the price, and you'll end up buying a car, or maybe not buying a car. But tomorrow, and actually it is already happening today in the US, with some of the clients that we work with, you can enter the car dealership, and you're given an iPad. You go through that iPad as you kind of go near a model. The iPad picks it up, kind of displays that model on your iPad, and then as you can go through the features, you understand what the features are all about. There is virtual reality, and there's augmented reality too. And then by the time you reach the customer salesperson, the salesperson really knows which model you've been focusing on, which are the features that are important to you, and they're already able to predict exactly like what you're looking for. And if, so they don't waste their time, you don't waste your time, and as well as you had a great experience knowing about the model. That is customer experience. Now, on the Internet of Things, you could have, let's say, mobility, connected mobility. So in terms of connected mobility, I mean, we make cars today where the driver information is already built in, and that information is already captured, and we are able to inform the driver. And many of you probably have it where you get a message from your car company saying that your brakes need to be replaced. Now, all those things are already happening. I mean, that is a part of what we do. Again, I mean, this is not just limited to automotive. It can also be for airlines. So if next time you're flying an airline, you can be assured that all the engine performance is already being fed to downstream so that people are already aware of if something is going wrong with the engine or with the operations of the aircraft. Now, one of the other things that we are looking at, and this is where Brazil plays a very important role, is precision farming. Now, let's face it. Brazil is one of the most important markets in the world from an agricultural standpoint. I mean, the resources that it has, the competencies that it has, I mean, you cannot beat Brazil from that standpoint. And that is something that we are working on. We have already got a partnership with a company called Topco here in Brazil. We bought a precision farming company in Canada called Reason. And we are working with all of them to bring precision farming to the farmers. And again, based on where the markets that we target, the small farmers who are also economically disadvantaged, now for them, this precision farming is critical because it saves cost. The less fertilizer that they use, it saves cost. The more productive they are, they become more prosperous. Now that is kind of where we are headed with our Internet of Things as well as the fourth industrial revolution. But let me just conclude by saying I have 8 seconds left, and I'll tell you, it's not all good, particularly when your family members are fighting with you and they don't talk to you and they only text you. That's also a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilip. So we now turn to the second round of questions. We have about 15 minutes left, so about a couple of minutes per question. I'm talking about precision farming, but with access to the markets. You concluded the EU-Mercosur agreement, historic conclusion of an agreement that had been in negotiation for 20 years. So Secretary Troyjo, what are some of the lessons learned from this experience? What sort of impact, in particular, do you anticipate here for the Brazilian economy, for the private sector? And if I may ask, what comes next? And count with IDB support.
Well, as everyone knows, it was a very long negotiation. Actually, it's more precise to say that negotiations between the European Union and Mercosur started in the second half of the 1990s. But there were many interruptions, right? Either because Europe was focusing on the horizontal expansion of their agreements to embrace countries that once belonged to the so-called Iron Curtain sphere of influence, or because we had a succession here in South America of populist left-wing countries that ended up adapting Mercosur to become a sort of political mouthpiece instead of an instrument to promote international trade. Well, I think the overall global scenario also helped a lot in putting the agreement together, because Europe wanted to have a privileged access to a market that exceeds 250 million people here. We also believe that from a Mercosur perspective, reaching that agreement creates a sort of mirror effect dynamics that's very good to Brazil. So because you have the agreement with Europe, with the European Union, then it was easier to conclude it with AFTA. And then that creates also a positive momentum for negotiations with the US, with Japan. Japan, for example, we should start formal negotiations very soon. The only region of the world with which Japan does not have an FTA is South America, so it's also in their geopolitical priority to do so. There's obviously, and this is not only about an agreement, but about a vision, about a strategy, which has to do with the very metamorphosis of Southeast Asia. Because what's happening out there, and when I mentioned earlier on that there is a breakout in some of the global supply chain networks, but there's the setup of new ones, you have a change of DNA in China's economy, either as a result of the exhaustion of its own export model, or also as a consequence of the trade standoff between Beijing and Washington. So an important part of China's manufacturing hubs are moving away to countries in their geoeconomic vicinity, countries like Thailand and Indonesia and Myanmar and Vietnam. So these are countries with huge populations, right? And their GDP per capita is growing up in a very impressive way. And what literature and history teach us is that whenever you have an appreciation of income per capita this fast from such a low level, because GDP per capita in the region, even if you put China into the picture, is only about $3,500, is that when the curve is going up, what you actually do with the incremental income is you eat more and you build more infrastructure. So that is going to bring about extraordinary opportunities for countries like Brazil. So the narrative that there was like a global commodities boom somewhere between the 2003 and 2011, and that is gone, I think we're going to have to look once again back at that narrative, because as I see it, there is a structural change in the global demand for agricultural and mineral commodities. So that may be a major window of opportunity for countries like Brazil. So we have to strategize upon that vision. This is a major opportunity for Brazil, and also a major opportunity for us to set up joint ventures with the other big superpower in food, which is the United States.
Thank you, Secretary. Ambassador Moretti, what is Brazil's assessment of the current state of Mercosur? And what are some of the critical areas where you think further progress is needed to ensure that it becomes a modern and robust economic bloc and projects itself into the future?
Well, thank you. I'll answer this particular question in English. This government came to office with, let's be frank, clear criticism of Mercosur. And it did so because there was a lot to criticize. At the same time, there's been progress made. The way we see Mercosur now is that, and when I say now, I mean now, because there's a lot of uncertainty associated with electoral processes that are coming very soon, is that Mercosur is able to go back to its original function as it was envisaged, as a tool for our integration into the world economy. It has, it has contributed to some extent. Someone mentioned, I think you mentioned that we have a virtual free trade area in our region now. Mercosur was part of that. We shouldn't deny it. Mercosur is important for exports to Argentina, for example, as we know. Thank you. For Argentina, as we know. But there's a lot to do. And I think the biggest, good news right now in Mercosur that it has decided to be the proper vehicle for very ambitious trade agreements. EU-Mercosur is just one example. And we are ready to, Secretary Troyjo mentioned Japan, there's Lebanon, there's other than the ones that are already underway, Vietnam. So there's a whole set of countries with which Mercosur can and we hope will help us get closer to. And there is one, and that's why I decided to answer this question in English, so that our English-speaking friends understand it from directly, is that depending on how things work in the near future, Mercosur can be the proper vehicle for us to make progress in deepening our relations with the United States. This can happen through Mercosur, depending on how things move, and it may happen without Mercosur, depending on how these things move. Brazil's firm intention is to make this go, and it will. And we've been talking with the Americans. I could accompany the minister in a series of meetings in Washington about 2 weeks ago. We talked with Ambassador Lighthizer. We talked about it with Secretary Ross, Secretary Pompeo, and the message that we sent across was very clear. Brazil is ready to start talking about modalities. I mean, we are flexible, we're open. We have to see what works for both. But the most important thing is that we are ready. It's not going to be necessarily quick or easy, but the political will is there. And we do hope that in Washington we'll very soon find the same kind of disposition to start to sit with us and figure out what modality for further trade ties would work for both. We're optimistic in Washington. We did feel good disposition. I think they're, as we are, trying to figure out what these modalities would be. But it's about time for us to really focus on how we translate this mutual disposition into an actual process. We have our bilateral processes, etc., that were not born today, but they can be vehicles for something much more ambitious than today. And I'm sure that Senator Scott will help us there.
We turn right there right now.
Okay,
So it's a great moment for that. Talking about the relations between the U.S. and Brazil, which actually exchanged $100 billion, the bilateral trade in 2018. So, Senator, in this context, much has been discussed about both countries pursuing closer trade relationships, including a free trade agreement. So what are the opportunities and challenges for pursuing this agenda? And in that process, what role can even the state of Florida play?
Sure. Well, first off, I think almost all trade, all trade should go through Florida, but I'm from Florida, that's why. But one thing before I forget, I have a DC office, I have offices around the state of Florida. If anybody's has any issues they're dealing with at the federal government level and you're in DC or you want to talk to somebody in DC, don't reach them. Reach out to our office. We'll do everything we can to be helpful. And we have offices in Florida, so if you have issues there, I was governor for 8 years, and I'll try to be helpful there. I think the biggest thing, you have to go talk to people. I'm a business guy. I did deals all my life. And you go find out what the other person needs, and you go try to solve their needs. What's great about the relationship we have with Brazil right now, both President Trump and President Bolsonaro want to get something done. They want to increase trade. They want democracy and freedom and opportunities for the people of Brazil and for the people of the United States. So I think now the biggest thing is just keep showing up and telling people what your needs are and listen to the other person's needs. I'm very optimistic that we're going to get great things done.
Okay, great. That was short and sweet and optimistic. So, Lisa, Dow operates both in Brazil and Argentina. How much does regulatory divergence in the chemical and petrochemical sectors affect intra-regional trade? And what role do you think the industry, the private sector, could play along with governments in promoting regulatory cooperation and harmonization?
Absolutely. Well, I'll add to the optimism because, as you heard at AmCham, within the draft work in progress we've got at the CEO Forum, at the Americas Business Dialogue, regulatory cooperation always features because, as we all know, at some level it affects every aspect of your operations. And regulation really should be about hitting those high standards and also ensuring economic competitiveness. And we see a real area of opportunity. As Brazil's been working on draft chemical regulatory management law, that can really help serve as a model, both in the Mercosur area, working with Argentina. There's an MOU with the Argentinian government to cooperate in this space, really driving a standard that can embed this sound science, risk-based approach here between trading partners, but then also serving as a model for the region. And we feel as an industry, it's really our responsibility to help be part of that process. We've created, along with the companies here as domestic Brazilian manufacturers, there's a very strong regulatory cooperation forum that is actually engaged with regulators here in Brazil and across the region to come together at workshops where we can actually walk through the process of what regulation really means in a way that really focuses on how do we bring the best benefit, the strongest regulation, but that also brings benefits to the regulators who, when you cooperate with others, there's burden sharing, it's resource efficient, it's streamlined from an industry standpoint so that large, most importantly, small business really has access to the process and can work through it. And at the end of the day, brings more innovation in the market. So we see this as a real growth opportunity, particularly as not only is it good for the domestic economy, it meets the OECD application requirements, and it embeds that while it's national regulation, the more commonality with others, the more it facilitates free trade agreement commitments.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Luiz, liberalization of agricultural trade has lagged other sectors of the economy, and significant subsidies and non-tariff barriers remain in place in agriculture. Could you please discuss the importance of free trade and globalization to the development of the food industry global supply chains and the impact that such measures continue to have?
Claro que sim. Eu vou dar exemplo que para mim é muito interessante. Nós falamos muito do Brasil. O Brasil tem uma ótima produção no setor sucroalcooleiro, no setor de proteína animal, no setor de grãos. Mas, por exemplo, nós temos algumas deficiências de produtos que nós precisamos importar, que ainda nós não somos autossuficientes. Então, o que eu concordo demais que o embaixador Moretti comentou, que ainda que a OMC esteja passando por um momento de dificuldade, e que nós precisamos ajudar a OMC a sair desse momento, é fundamental que nós reconheçamos, inclusive como Brasil, as nossas vantagens e as nossas desvantagens. Não adianta querer que o Brasil seja um grande produtor de trigo, ainda que nós produzimos bastante trigo, ou de malte, porque isso não vai acontecer. Então, o lindo do setor de agronegócios com uma combinação do livre comércio é que as mercadorias possam ir e vir sem nenhum tipo de barreiras. Agora, de novo, para isso, as nossas empresas, os nossos produtores, nós precisamos estar preparados para poder competir. E a OMC, a importância da OMC para esse sistema, como foi bem falado também pelo embaixador, 7 processos que equivalem a 7 bilhões para o Brasil, é que isso seja regulado por uma entidade que seja confiável, para que nós, brasileiros, podemos ser bastante competitivos e aproveitar a nossa competitividade para aprender com outros países também, e exportar muitos dos nossos produtos, não só no setor de agronegócios. Então, nós, da nossa empresa e eu representando aqui a AmCham, acreditamos piamente que o livre comércio é fundamental. Concordo também com o senador, vou ter o privilégio de estar com o senhor daqui a pouco, para discutir algumas iniciativas que o momento, a relação entre os dois países, Brasil e Estados Unidos, nunca foi tão propício para que a gente consiga caminhar juntos. Não dá para um país como o Brasil, aí com todo respeito às nossas autoridades aqui presentes, independente do Mercosul ou não, ficar dependendo, né, de um acordo com o Mercosul. Não, eu acredito no Mercosul também, morei 3 anos na Argentina, mas não dá para a gente dar as costas para o maior mercado consumidor do mundo, que é os Estados Unidos. Então, eu também estou muito otimista com essa relação.
Thank you, Luiz. Dilip, as we are running out of time, or we ran out of time already, you are going to have the last words, the last question of the panel. Brazil is India's most important trading partner in our region. And in this regard, Mahindra has been intensifying the presence of its line of farming equipment in our region in Brazil. What are the opportunities to take that relationship to another level, sort of the challenges and the opportunities to grow it even more?
Sure. So, again, in the interest of time, I'll keep this very short. The way I look at it is basically like, look, all countries have issues. It's like we have to navigate through that. So India is right now negotiating a trade deal with the United States. I mean, sure. So Brazil has its own issues too. The first thing is tax reform, and I'm very heartened to hear that there's tax reform on the table, and hopefully it'll happen. One of the jokes that I had at my previous company was, if you want to punish someone, make them responsible for taxes in Brazil. Okay, so hopefully that won't be the case anymore, and they'll think it as a honeymoon assignment. The second problem that we have is, let's say that, you know, our farmers, our customers who are the small-time farmers depend on FINAME for credit but then FINAME also says that you've got to have 50% localization. So 50% localization makes our product 25% more expensive than if I did not have that. So the farmer has a choice. Either he gets a FINAME credit and pays 25% more, or he does not get 50 FINAME credit. So that's the other problem. I mean, so the government has to think through those kind of initiatives. Whilst import substitution is important, but how do we innovatively think through that? Okay, and who are we really punishing? Again, when we talk about Roto 2030, it depends that for you to have the lower tariffs in Brazil, you need to have technical centers. Again, what it does is it punishes the average Brazilian consumer because it does not allow for competition to come in, because it makes the incumbent stronger and the imports, the competition that is trying to develop Brazil as a market is always disadvantaged. I mean, this is something, again, we got to think about. One of the other things that I would also talk about is the credit availability in general. So when you talk about credit availability, if you just set up a certain amount of funds, and by the time and those funds are used very rapidly, say in 6 months' time, all the credit is gone, then there is nothing left. All we have left with is inventory. The farmers don't buy anymore because they're waiting for the next year for the credit to become available. So this is, again, something that, I think we need to understand that credit needs to be a little more widespread. Otherwise, what is going to happen is the demand is going to be very cyclical, so which is also going to cause a lot of inventory problems. So the last thing I would also add is, last night I was having drinks with a friend of mine who is local to Sao Paulo, and he showed me his armored car. Now, I'd never seen an armored car in my life before, and that was the first time. And he said, look, I mean, a lot of people do that here. So I should think that, for foreign investment to be very attractive to Brazil, I think the security should be kind of thought about. Again, I have never faced a problem at all, but when you have local people driving in armored cars, it just raises a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilip. So in concluding this very amazing conversation and panel, we know that a lot of work has been done for Brazil's insertion into the global economy. We know that more work has to be done, but we also know that you cannot remain but optimistic about this great nation, about this great country. So we'd like to offer a round of applause for this really interesting panel.